before I get into sharing my screen, it sounds like we have an hour, so I'll probably aim to do like 15 or 20 minutes, and then we can use the rest of the time for discussion. Does that work? Cool. Sounds good. All right. Well, the title of my talk today is Capital Allocation in Local DAOs. So I've prepared a short talk about this design space and why I think it's important. And I'm going to spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes rapping. And then I've invited my friend Matt Harder, who is working on local capital allocation here in Boulder, Colorado, to give a talk about the work that he's up to. And then we can, from there, get into discussion and see what we can create when we play jazz together. So again, the title of my talk is Capital Allocation in Local DAOs. And I'm really excited about this design space. But first, let's define what this design space is. So I've defined DAOs as a organization or network that operates within a specific community or geographic area. This is a loose definition of DAOs. I think that some people have a requirement that it's decentralized or autonomous and that it's on chain. Here, I'm taking a little bit more of a looser definition of DAOs in order to zoom in on what I think is important in capital allocation and local DAOs. And then let's define the word capital allocation, which is basically the act of deciding how to distribute resources or funding, usually associated with accomplishing some sort of goal. So I'll start my talk by talking about capital allocation, and then we'll spend the second half of my talk talking about the intersection of capital allocation and local DAOs. So I think that capital allocation is really, really important. Whether we know it or not, we make hundreds of small decisions every month about how to allocate capital, whether that's basic things like repaying a friend for a meal, paying a bill, or just going shopping. But I think as it gets more advanced, capital allocation can become a full-time job and can become existential for people in modern society. So if you think about the amount of funding for DAO ecosystem development that we've seen via Web3 grants in 2023, it was over $100 million. That's all people who are deciding how to allocate capital to their ecosystem. If you go a little bit more trad, you can see that funding for scientific research is almost $1 trillion globally in 2023. Environmental and social impact, $1 trillion. Philanthropic initiatives, $600 billion. City, county, and state development projects, over $1 trillion globally in 2023. And funding for capital formation and economic growth is, depending on how you count it, over $25 trillion. So basically, when you're getting to these amounts of money, then you're trying to create some sort of outcome at a ecosystem level, impact on the world. And the decision of what you fund and why, what kind of incentives you're creating in the world, becomes really, really important. And the decision-making processes for some of these grant giving and capital allocation ecosystems can get really, really complicated. Is there an opportunity to bring this category on chain and change the way that capital allocation is done in the future? I think that there's a really exciting opportunity in it to do that in the future. And I think that in some ways, when you think about how the internet evolved, and basically when the internet was first taking off, we couldn't have imagined Twitter or TikTok. We couldn't have imagined how information being distributed in society was going to change. I think there's the same sort of phenomenon with Web3 eating the world as we tokenize all of our different assets and we're building funding infrastructure for the world. I think we can't even predict what the next categories of funding infrastructure are going to look like. Just like in the 90s, we couldn't have predicted Twitter or TikTok. So I think that we can reason about it from first principles a priori. I think that legacy capital allocation is associated with gatekeeping. You've got these centralized intermediaries that become power brokers in these ecosystems. And because they don't have all of the information that a network would have, they're not able to do precise capital allocation, and they're not able to scale the way they do capital allocation. And I think that now that we have programmable, decentralized, incorruptible money, then we're going to be able to create more accessible, democratic, evolutionary, incorruptible, transparent, and precise and scalable capital allocation in the 21st century because of blockchains. These are just the properties of blockchains, and I think that we're going to see them transposed into the funding decisions that we make about how to allocate capital. I think that this is really exciting to me as a technologist, because I run an Ethereum node. There's actually an Ethereum node right behind me right here. And it's also exciting to me as someone who believes in collective action. So I think that we're building new foundations for creating first the tokenization of assets, but on top of that, by changing the ways that we're able to allocate capital of those assets in the 21st century to be more precise, scalable, and global, that we're going to create better human coordination, and that's going to create more collective action around the causes that we actually care about. I'm actually involved in cartographying this frontier. I just wrote a book that I released at EthCC called the On-Chain Capital Allocation Handbook, which is an opportunity for you, the reader, to discover the emerging frontier of on-chain coordination. And if you want to get a copy, you can get one for free at allobook.Gitcoin.Co. That's a free PDF copy. And then I've also got print copies, which are available for about $30, which is more or less the cost that it cost me to print one of these things. Okay, so and these things are not completely disconnected from my role as the founder of Gitcoin. Gitcoin, if you've been following what we're doing, has been evolving from just quadratic funding, which is what it was known for traditionally in 2019 to 2023, into doing quadratic funding and retro funding. Obviously, optimism opened up an entirely new category of how we fund what matters in the crypto ecosystem. And we're taking our lessons from working with optimism on retro funding and from doing quadratic funding and baking them into what we call Allo Protocol, which is going to be the platform, the protocol that we use to launch a bunch of different capital allocation mechanisms for the world. So one exciting attribute of this is that Gitcoin's going multi-mechanism, and I think that we're going to be doing much more than quadratic funding in the future. Can't wait to see what that world looks like in the future. Okay, so that's the capital allocation bit of the talk. Looks like I got through that in about 6 or 7 minutes. I want to talk next about what's possible within the local DAO ecosystem and what I think is possible for local capital allocation. And then I'm going to hand over to my friend Matt, who's going to tell us about how he's doing an exciting experiment in local capital allocation here in Colorado. Okay, so the design space here is, how might we reimagine how we do capital allocation locally? We've now got web scale mechanisms for doing precise and really powerful capital allocation. How can we transpose those locally into our local ecosystems? So I think that what we're playing in here is the idea of the cosmolocal. I think Van Gist is in the audience. He's the one who taught me this word. Shout out, Ben, if you're listening. Cosmolocal is basically the idea of how do we take the interplay between the global and the local and make it more symbiotic. So basically, how do we take open source software and open source money, these things that we have global talent working on, and create a symbiotic interplay between that and localism, where we have networks of trust, where we have relationships, where we actually have on the ground, touching grass, relationships to the earth in addition to each other. And I think that this is something that's really, I'm very passionate about, having had a career in Web 2 before Web 3. I'm not very happy with the interplay between the global and the local in Web 2. I think that there's a lot of emphasis on extracting from the local in order to create better profits and shareholder outcomes for Facebook or for Google. So in a sense where we've got the global extracting from the local in Web 2, in what ways can we make the global, the Cosmo, supportive and regenerative and symbiotic with the local, is one of the themes that I'm excited about here. Shout out Ven for teaching me about this word cosmolocal. Another area where I think that there's going to be sort of like a fulcrum, an inflection point of Web3 mechanisms being used locally, is in bioregions, which is defined as a geographic area with natural features like climate and vegetarian, it's the Boulder, Colorado in me, vegetation and ecosystems rather than political boundaries. So if you're into funding public goods, if you're into funding ecosystems, then one of the important things that you're going to want to do if you support the future of humanity and the environment in your local area is make sure that your bioregion public goods are well funded. So the vegetation, the climate, the ecosystem in your local area, we're going to want to make sure that these bioregions are are well supported. And I think that the really exciting thing here is how can we take the networks of trust and relationships that we have locally and bring them into the digital? And then also, how can we take the digital web scale culture and coordination mechanisms that we've created and bring them into our geographic communities? So basically, how are we going to take the capital allocation that we've invented and bring it into our local ecosystems? And then how are we going to take the networks of trust that we have locally and start to build trust in Web3? And it's this intersection that I think a lot of cool stuff is going to happen. So maybe I'll just rattle off a couple different ways that I know that local city-states do capital allocation today, and then I want to hear about a bold and innovative experiment that is going on in the ecosystem, and we'll do a case study on that from there. So let's start with just traditional capital allocation in a plain buttoned-up trad city government. So the allocation of tax dollars in city governments typically decided by a combination of the city council or legislative body and the mayor or city manager. The mayor or city manager proposes a budget with input from different departments and public consultations, lobbyists, and the city council reviews, amends, and ultimately approves the budget. In some cases, voters might have a direct say through referendum or participatory budgeting processes. Okay, so I think that there's a lot to learn about how things have been done in the past and why they've been done in the past, as we're learning about how the public allocation could be done in the future. Building on that, I think that one area where we've seen the combination of markets and public goods and is through public-private partnerships. So basically, cities collaborating with private sector entities to fund and deliver public services and infrastructure projects, which allows for shared risk and resources and more efficient and innovative funding solutions. So you can see that everything from transportation networks to desalination plants have been funded and created through public-private partnerships across the world. This is one of the areas that we're starting to see over the last 40 years, more and more cities allocate capital this way. Next, performance-based budgeting. Okay, so using data and performance metrics to allocate capital, funds are directed to programs and projects that demonstrate high effectiveness, ensuring a better use of resources. Okay, so you basically put out metrics and the community is able to draw against funding if they're able to hit those metrics. And typically this is something that has been state departments able to draw on more funding if they're able to hit certain metrics more so than the community. Although with networks and internet and we're starting to see this used outside of government. Okay, the next area of legacy capital allocation pre-on-chain that I think is really cool is social impact bonds. So basically, private investors put upfront capital up for public projects, and then the government repays them based off of this project's success. So it's like retroactive funding for governments. So basically, we've seen some examples in prison bonds where basically if a prisoner doesn't commit a crime again, then basically the people who provided their education makes a profit with the social impact bond. Preschool programs where basically if the education goes, like the metric, the social impact bond is based off of how that student performs in higher education, and then through life, there can be a financial reward for the people who are running those programs. So that's an example of a social impact bond. And it's actually a really great segue into the next category, which is green bonds. Basically, green bonds are specifically earmarked for initiatives that combat climate change and have renewable energy infrastructure. So you can see below that there's a bunch of cities, states, and even a company, Apple, that have put out green bonds for people who are doing environmental work in the community. And then the last category that I want to talk about is crowdfunding, microfinance, and participatory budgeting. So this is actually explicitly involving the everyday citizens in your community to raise funds for specific local projects, and in some cases, even be able to allocate city government funds. Crowdfunding, I think, is really cool because it allows communities to rally around projects that they actually care about, but it does require input from local communities and from private donors. And then participatory budgeting is a process through which we involve residents directly in the decision-making process, and then citizens can vote on how a portion of the budget should be spent. ensuring that the allocation reflects community priorities. So this is something that we're seeing taking off a lot in the modern era as web platforms are starting to launch that allow communities to vote on what neighborhood infrastructure that they actually care about. So this is actually a good segue into the next part of the presentation. My friend Matt Harder is on the call. This is a picture of us hiking this weekend in the mountains in Colorado, and I was telling him all about capital allocation and local stuff. And I was like, hey, I could actually use a really good tangible example of in high resolution how participatory budgeting and capital allocation will change locally as young people who are doing work in this area are coming up. And I was like, oh wait, I'm on a hike with someone who's really innovating in this area. Matt is the founder and CEO of Civic Trust and is working on participatory budgeting work in a number of localities now. And so I'd love to hand it off to him for about 10 minutes to discuss the work that he's doing. And then I think from there, we'll have about 20 minutes for discussion and Q&A from there. So please join me in welcoming Matt Harder to the stage. What's up, Matt?
What's up, guys? You hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Nice.
And take us away.
Sure. And really good prezi there, Kevin. It's so fun to see you talk in my language like this, because a lot of time we're just like hanging out, we're neighbors, and or at least we live in Boulder, and so we have a lot of fun talking about crypto stuff and all kinds of governance stuff. But to see it condensed like that is really great. So, all right, guys. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about how we allocate local funds here in Colorado. A bit about my background. I started this company, Civic Trust, 5 or 6 years ago. I was working in New York City on their participatory budgeting program, and we were allocating about $40 million a year. And I was in charge of all the voting. So we had 100,000 votes, digital, physical, 17 languages, 40 different ballots, so run in different city council districts. So really a wild process, but I got a view into the way that we can collaborate with our citizens to do a better job of getting feedback on the way we want the budget spent. Sorry, I'm just going to reorient my screen. And so I did that. I decided that I could do it in a way which is cleaner and easier on the government. So I started Civic Trust. I worked in Atlanta for 2 years. We did a $1 million transport PB. We did a $50,000 arts PB. Which was really cool. We brought in a lot of community funds, so we matched. We turned the 50,000 into 120,000.
Suck my dick.
That was unusual.
I think whoever's moderating, I think we have a troll in the audience, so just keep an eye on that.
Yeah. And then now we're doing one in Denver, Colorado. We have $1 million in Denver, Colorado. So I'm gonna take you through how a PB works at a local level, because I imagine a lot of people on the call have not been involved with a PB before. It's not that common yet. And then I'll discuss how I think a local DAO might get involved if helping contribute to some of these public goods, some of these local projects is of interest. I can talk about how I think that might be done, and then I can contribute to the Q&A to the extent that's helpful. A PB has more or less 4 phases. You'll have a planning phase where you're going to put together a steering committee. You're going to decide who's making the rules, where the authority lies, et cetera. You could be calling on the community for that, or you could just have the project administrators helping put all that together. But you'll plan it. You'll collect a bunch of proposals from the community. Now, this can be very loose. It can be like anybody on the internet can give us a proposal, because a good idea is a good idea. Or you can make it very constrained to the geography. You have to live here. You have to work here. You have to study here and have some kind of a stake in the community. So we collect all those proposals on an online platform that I will show you. And then actually the biggest chunk is the ballot preparation, is taking all of those ideas that were proposed and turning them into projects that city departments can understand and price and are willing to actually do. Translating what we want, what the public wants, into something that the city is willing to do and willing to digest is definitely a challenge. That's a big part of what we're putting up with at Civic Trust and trying to innovate past and finding allies within these departments. So that's a big one, is just working with these departments to get a final list. And then we do a vote, which in this case I have 2 months, because that's what Denver wants to run. Usually it's a little bit shorter, but that's when we have everybody who lives, works, studies, et cetera, in that environment vote on the winning projects that they want. And so this is an old platform. Forgive me, some of this deck is a bit old, and so the screenshots are a bit old, but it totally will get the concept across. You'll go to a website, you will enter information around this project that you have. So you'll give it a title, you'll give it a description, you'll talk about how it helps the community. You'll make sure that it's within the geographic boundaries. You will give it perhaps an address and leave some of your personal information. And that's how an idea is submitted. Then an admin will look at the submitted project. They'll make sure that it's not pornographic, and then they will allow it to be posted on the website. So this is, again, an old screenshot, but you'll see all these pins around your community of different things that people have proposed. And then you'll see a feed of all these different projects that people can like and share. We don't do comments because we just don't find them to be particularly productive, but you can like and share them, and it kind of creates a little buzz around these different projects. Then I skipped because there's no screenshots around the ballot preparation, but that's just a lot of administrative work. You finally wind up with voting. So this image actually is a ballot that was created by Stanford, and I partnered with them for one of my earlier projects. So that's this screenshot. What I'll direct your attention to is there's a bar at the top. I call it the money meter. You may notice that it says selected $20,000 of $45,000. So the way that you vote for participatory budgeting, ideally, is something called knapsack voting, again, developed at Stanford, where you can select as many projects as you want within the budget of the overall PB. So the projects are actually competing against each other for the maximum value that it gives to the voter, right? And so if a project's too expensive, it probably won't get through. And if if projects are, if it seems like a good value, people will vote for it. And so what we've noticed with this type of voting is a really good allocation of funds geographically in terms of themes. People have an innate sense of wanting to get value for their money, even if it's not their money, even if it's just the scarcity is the amount of money they're allowed to allocate. They're really good at allocating it this way. So I put two lists here of winning projects. Let's see. Oh, it stopped sharing. So I'm going to just put it right back up. I don't know why that happened. All right, y'all. Do I still have you, or did I drop?
No, I see it.
Okay, cool. All right, so so I'm going to give you two lists of winning projects. I'll highlight a couple, but this was a transport one we did. The winning project was more pedestrian-only streets. It was just to shut down an area for pedestrian-only during the weekend. Completely logical project. Number 2 and 3 were handicap access. They wanted ADA accessibility on their sidewalks. Number 4 is my personal favorite. It's make dangerous island more visible. If I give the longer presentation, I show you a picture of this, but this was literally an island in the middle of the street. It was not painted, so everybody would hit it with their cars, and 2,000 people wanted to see it painted, so they stopped doing that. So it's like extremely logical projects that come through, and this is so helpful for administrators to see that people want good things. Like, even though presumably 2,000 people don't require ADA compliant curbs, they want that, and they saw that that was a good value for $6,000 and $9,000 respectively. So great projects get submitted, great projects wind up winning. This is a parks project that we did. I'll draw your attention to the bottom section where we came in with $45,000 in Atlanta, and you'll see Candler Park Conservancy, it shows there in the bottom left. That's one nonprofit group that we partnered with that said, hey, if these projects win, because they're on our docket, they're stuff that we want to see go through. If they win, we'll pay for half, or we'll pay for some significant portion of it. And so for project 1, you see $12,000. That is Candler Park's bathroom overhaul. So they have desperately been trying to get this bathroom fixed for literally something like 20 years. And we were able to come in. We were working with the government, in this case, a city council district. So we were able to say, okay, we'll work with parks and we will get this bathroom fixed if you can come up with some of the money. So this was sort of a public-private partnership like Kevin was talking about. We're bringing the community together with their funds, using the ability of the city to do installs and doing all these projects. And so this was another process that had a lot of winners. Fixing benches. Project number 3, an urban orchard, plant edible fruit. Project number 4, kudzu removal. Just really, again, common sense stuff. And we were able to turn the $45,000 into $110,000, which was a great win for the whole community. So you do not need a big budget to have an impact within the community, and it got a lot of people involved. I'm going to try and wrap it at the 30-minute mark, so 3 more minutes. We got a lot of positive reviews. That was nice. We asked people if they thought that it was a positive step towards better engaging the public. 99% said yes. Both occasions, very, very high ratings. So citizens like this type of experience, or residents. 36% of the people who got involved with this were what we call highly disengaged. So they had gotten involved with the government once or twice ever or never in their lives. So this was their first time interacting with the government. And it was, again, a very positive experience for them, right? So that's what we're trying to do, is bring people into these processes which exist. And then that chart on the left, would you like to be more civically engaged than you currently are? 75% of people do want to be more civically engaged than they are. And so we want to provide opportunities for that. I will give you guys a couple thoughts on how a local DAO or an organization could get involved with something like this. So one of the things that Civic Trust sort of specializes in is dealing with the drudgery of local government. That means answering RFPs. That means being very patient when city departments don't want to do certain things, and kind of continually translating it so that something that the public loves comes out on the other end, even though city bureaucrats aren't always 100% behind this. And so what we're trying to do is open up the space of how we participate with local resource allocation. And we can do that on the city side. What local DAOs can do is much more on the frontier, much more on the experimental side. And I do see a world where these things can be combined. So the benefits of what Civic Trust does is we work with city departments. We have city-side budgets that we're working with. We can change the system from within, which is very important if you're like a voice versus exit person. You know, we are changing the system from within. You get legitimacy when you're working with the government, and you get more public interest. The drawbacks are the clients are very, very hard, which DAOs don't have to deal with because they don't have to deal with the government directly. And our projects are extremely limited. We have to do only those things which the city governments are willing to install. We are actually in Denver working with some third parties, which may turn out very interesting. So I may actually modify this because their capital budgets in Denver are quite loose. And it does seem that we can work with third-party partners for things like tiny homes, which would be really exciting. But overall, our entrepreneurial opportunities are limited. What we do has to be sort of like templated. And so we work with local governments, but what I perceive here is you see, like on the right side, a DAO could work with some like trusted civic actor. Like Kevin mentioned a project that he did here in Boulder where he worked with the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. You could also work with a business improvement district. But you could do something like that, and it could be very similar to a PB, but something where you're getting the public's involvement in an allocation of resources and just getting some experience under your belt so that the city can see that, one, you work with credible people, and two, you generate good results. And then a company like ours, Civic Trust, we could integrate you into a larger process where we're dealing with capital budgets and a capital ballot. And so when you come to vote for us, you're allocating whatever, $1 million. But then there can be a secondary ballot that is sponsored by the Chamber of Commerce or whatever, and, you know, ATX DAO or whatever that DAO is. And that can be for other projects. So there could be that kind of linkage that you could grow off of and continue to increase that space. And that's the kind of, that's what I think that might look like. So I'll wrap it there. And thanks for having me, guys. This was fun.
Thanks, Matt. So that's all I had prepared for you all. I wanted to give sort of a high-level view of my space and how it's going to evolve. And then Matt's bringing the tangible, actually doing this locally to the group. And would love to open up the second half of the call for discussion and questions and comments. If there's anyone from PDX DAO that wants to moderate or do traffic cop, then happy to let them do that. And if not, I will do it. I think that means that it's probably me. Ben Life has a couple questions in the comments. Matt, how do you manage identity? How do you evaluate budget viability for proposals? And how do you triage or set parameters for funding priorities? So I don't know if you want to take a swing at any or all of those.
I missed the second two, so I'll take them one at a time. I'm happy to answer whatever questions, but your question is how we manage identity, Yeah, I could just look at the chat, actually. I'm an awful multitasker, but I will stretch myself here. So I'm looking at Ben Life's question here. How do you manage identity? Our authentication is, generally we keep this loose. This is always intention, right? Like, how big of a space do you want people to be able to pass through? So we do an affidavit where the person sort of on an honor system says who they are and where they live or whatever. And then we use cell phone authentication to prove that they're only voting one time. And then we have other things on the back end where we're looking for vote tampering. And so that's what we do. We always give the city the option to be more rigorous about this, but anything more rigorous than that would usually require a pre-registration, which is such a heavy overhead process in terms of verification that they're not interested. They're much more interested in this as a public engagement process, which does not demand 100% perfect accuracy. There could be a little slippage, but make it broad. They're happy to do that trade-off and make it very easy to participate, fun to participate, and broad. How do I evaluate budget viability for proposals? Can you, Benjamin, do you mind just rephrasing that? I know you're right here.
Yeah, a little bit of extra context. There is a platform called Othello that does a kind of like triaging like algorithm that helps identify like what are a community's funding priorities, like the relative value of the proposal to members versus how much money it how much it costs to achieve. And so I'm curious if you have a way of kind of vetting like, oh, we can't build a playground for $10,000, but we could do this, or like, how do you go from like the proposal stage to like making sure that the city actually can do something for that proposed budget?
Yeah, I worked for Othello for like a year, by the way, so I'm very close with John, and the math, John's the guy who runs Othello is primarily a mathematician and has really done, it's a wild project in terms of the way that Othello is designed to find decisions, so like results to questions or whatever, that are maximally pleasing to the most amount of people or the least polarizing or whatever. And it uses quite a lot of math to get there. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty impressive. It's good for certain kinds of decisions. Civic trust approach is totally different. I would almost define this as more entrepreneurial, whereas you're a person, you're a resident, you put forth an idea, that very idea could see its way all the way through. Whereas with Othello, it's much more likely to say, what are your priorities? Let's get like a map of what the community really values. And it's less specific, if that makes sense. So they're different in that way. The way to vet a proposal is ultimately, it gets entered into the system. We see likes and we see like the kind of buzz that it gets from the community. We apply a rubric that was designed at the planning phase. And so this is whatever community members are interested in this. The rubric might be longevity. It could be cost or necessary maintenance. Is that high or low? And so it's scored through a rubric process. And then, it finds its way to the ballot if it is within scope and the rubric number is high enough. Now, as a person who makes digital ballots and somebody who's really interested in digital voting, I like the idea of letting as many proposals as possible through. But a lot of times cities want to do paper ballots, which require a very extreme winnowing. And so then you do really have to apply that rubric and then only the popular projects get through. Do you want me to keep going on this third one, Kevin, or keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have, how do you triage or set parameters for funding priorities? Okay, I saw this second. That's your second one. Yeah, so the priorities are set by the project administrator, Benjamin. And so the funding, oftentimes the funding stream will dictate what the money can be spent on. They'll say, we have parks funds, we have transport funds. So you're entering into the process usually with a constraint. Alternatively, they may just have like something that they want to impact. And so they'll say, okay, we've freed up some general funds or funds which are very flexible, but we want to attribute it to something like homelessness. And so that's all figured out at the beginning. And again, project administrators and or the steering committee, which oftentimes is made up of locals, will choose what those priorities are. And those priorities, by the way, are made into project categories, so that when you're submitting a project, when you're submitting a proposal idea, it has to be within one of those categories. So it's decided at the planning phase and then narrowed at the proposal phase. So it has to be one of the predetermined categories.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt, for answering all of those. I'm going to shut up now, but I keep coming back to the potential of a really user-friendly ZKID Sybil resistance for local participatory budgeting. And I'm wondering, maybe I'll take this offline with you and Kev next time we hang out to just talk about potentially looking for funding to build that as a kind of modular tool that anyone could use to verify ID locally and keep it super simple. I'm going to shut up now. Thanks for answering my questions.
My pleasure. Yeah, Benjamin, Kevin, and I all live in Boulder, so we see each other around. So happy to talk about it more at the region space.
Sorry about that. I think my network dropped. So someone else was saying something. Go ahead.
I think I was going to say what you were going to, because I was just going to say, Matt, there's a couple more questions in the chat. Can you see them? Yeah.
I can. So I'll just go down the list here. So Q for Matt, both Matt and Kevin. Can you say more about how civic trust and local DAOs might immediately collaborate to mutually extend capacities to affect their local cities bioregion? Kevin, do you want to take a stab at that? You ran a cool process here in Boulder. I'm happy to say more too.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that there is opportunity to start getting more funding flowing into environmental projects, bioregional projects. My first reaction is to the word immediate. I just don't think that we're there yet. And, you know, I think that we have to be honest that we're in sort of a moment of generational change. And then I think that we're also in a moment of taking up the mantle of starting to actually work on participatory budgeting and local capital allocation. And I don't think that we're quite there yet, but I'm curious if anyone else in the group has anything to add. Exit, I think that your hand raised, so go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning. Yeah, it's been something that's come up in Portland that just in terms of, at least from the DAO side, people are not ready to be onboarded. Just the status of cryptocurrency in the public world, especially in the do-gooder space, is just like no credibility. So we've been thinking a lot about how can you bring in, without network effects, how can you use some of these tools to like influence local community at scale without just trying to onboard, like mass onboard people. And I think some good examples, Seth mentioned in his question, City Repair. We just had an awesome interview with them, by the way, that I'll throw in the chat, with Mark Lakeman, who founded City Repair. But Rebuilding Center is sort of closely aligned with, close friends with City Repair and aligned with them. And they were doing essentially multi-capital fund, like multi-capital allocation, right? They found that you know, friends of theirs were ripping open houses and getting access to, like, you know, cabinets and resources that people needed. And so they said, okay, we have all these like sort of household appliances and all these things that we were able to get for very cheap. We'll sell them basically at sell them for as cheap as possible, just bringing in enough revenue to continue the project, and scaled up from there. And 5-6 years later, the government does a study of what they're doing and sees, oh, from a climate perspective, from an infrastructure security perspective, from a racial equity perspective, this is hitting all the boxes. So it took them 5 years of running autonomously, just using the multi-capital resources that they had available to them, to bring in what later became like really massive, they were like very significant government subsidies, at which point they were able to, you know, start classes and like just, you know, buy some new buildings and just really spread out. But that initial just like really tight bootstrapping, it required like multi-capital resources. I'll give one more example, which is let me see if I can pronounce it right. After the Soviets left in Cuba, all of the all the soil had been fucked up because they were doing monoculture, monocropping for decades, and just like everybody's eating, Russian, like Serbian spam or Siberian spam. So when the Soviet Union collapses and that relationship collapses, they just said, oh, the local community there was like, well, I guess we're just gonna have to start farming. So they took sort of legacy seeds that they had in their families, and were just like building stuff on their roofs, building these organic gardens everywhere. And eventually Raul Castro takes a look at the situation. Again, it took several years, and said, oh, look, here's a grassroots solution to the food crisis. Let's subsidize it. And now it's this gigantic, extensive program that, again, was just people leveraging multi-capital resources in lieu of financial resources. And I think that DAOs are in a position to instigate that kind of like reevaluation of what capital is.
That's really exciting. I'll just add, so Exen, I don't know exactly how to pronounce that, but the story you just told previously, was that about Portland with the city repair, where they had just installed fixes, and then the city eventually, after 5 years, kind of integrated them in and allowed them to like help fund them?
Well, there's actually two stories there that are like closely aligned. One is Rebuilding Center was just taking in, it was basically a warehouse for accumulated goods that household goods that could be sold at cheap, construction goods also. City Repair itself was doing something called intersection repair, where they were building out, they were painting intersections and building out sort of building out these community spaces. And what ended up happening was, the long story short, like traffic police come and they're like, you guys are breaking like 40 fucking laws. Like, what are you thinking? And it ended up being this whole regulatory battle. And then after, 3 months or so, the mayor came through and gave full amnesty, and they generated a bill called the City Repair Bill that allowed sort of across the board amnesty on this particular type of activity. And, that's less of a case of resource allocation, more of a case of sort of instigating confrontations with like bureaucrats and regulatory systems in order to sort of push through more direct community and participatory situations.
Yeah, that's punk rock. I love that. That's really cool. Yeah, I guess I have a couple thoughts when I hear about that, which is that, of course, residents should have the ability to go in and fix these things, especially when you look at what it costs, like a contractor who's willing to do it versus a city department. Usually a city department is 3 times more expensive, oftentimes much more than that. It's quite wild. Sometimes it's because they just have such insane regulations they need to follow that the contractor's unaware of. But I would say anybody who's bold enough to push the envelope in this direction, that's a great win, that story. And, we do want it. What we want to do, I think all of us, especially on this call, but just in general as society, is open up the space in which residents can coordinate and act, so that they're not constantly in a position of asking the government to do everything. We should be able to be actors. We've got way too much of a sort of a layer of the government as the actor and us as just sort of like a spectator. And that's not, I don't even think that's what democracy is supposed to be about. We've just kind of gotten real lazy over the last, 50 years with this bureaucratic state that's grown up. And so models that push against that, I think, are fantastic. And it's encouraging to hear that story.
There's a question in the chat about city repair. I don't know if you see that, Matt.
Oh, sorry. There was the connection was getting a little choppy. Yeah, that's what I think we were just talking about, was that city repair activist not waiting. And so, yeah, I'm in favor of it. I mean,
Nice.
I'll say one more thing about it since we're still talking about city repair, which is just like, this is on some level going to be a campaign, you know? And I think that when we're talking about society, so like, let's say you're a local DAO and you're wanting to create change in your city, you know, dealing with the government, it may take years to do that in a certain way, to do that properly. You know, maybe it takes 5 years or something. That's the timeline that Exent mentioned, right? Before you're acknowledged as a positive actor. And so it's important as a community, and this kind of goes to that prior question too, that you guys get together and like each other and spend time together and have like a bond, so that you are willing to keep doing this for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and pushing forward and all these things. Because that's what it takes to develop a positive reputation with the government, to be seen as non-threatening, to be seen as a productive member, even if you're like a little hard-edged or whatever. And I would say trying to find alliances with these quasi or these civic organizations, you know, it doesn't have to be a chamber of commerce, which is seen as very square. It can be even like some kind of like a homeless outreach group, or these different groups which are held in high regard by the government and have political influence. A lot of times that happens, that there are groups that are held in high regard and have a lot of influence with members of office or like a council member. If you can ally with a group like that and build reputation with them through some kind of processes, that's really going to help you. That speaks to governments, these types of alliances and that building of credibility. But again, it takes a long time. So your social bonds, having a strategy around this stuff like city repair, and then focusing on social bonds so that you're in it for the long haul, I think are the key things.
Ben, looks like you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was raising my hand as you were speaking all the things that I was about to say, but I use the term prefigurative politics, which came out of my experiences in Occupy, that basically like not seeing the government as the enemy necessarily, but not as like a requirement for catalyzing direct action in the community. And as you said, like using the track record to build that trust, because so many of the things that I think we're doing in terms of these parallel society mechanisms are things that I imagine something like the government will do in the future. And so how do we set that up with enough integrity and resilience to function on its own, while using that as kind of a bargaining chip to assert our influence over legacy institutions? You basically said that, but I just wanted to jump in and echo it.
Yeah, it's great. Totally agree.
All right. Any more questions? If not, we can break. Matt, thanks for carrying the load as my internet died over here. I think I'm back. Knock on wood.
No problem, man. This is fun. It's a great subject, and it's good to see people in Portland and elsewhere getting into it.
Yeah.
Kevin has spoken very highly of a conference that's run in Portland around this type of subject. Maybe I'd like to attend one of these days, because Portland's an amazing city, and this is really cool content.
So it's the General Forum on Ethereum Localism. Quick shill for it. I think there's one coming up in September. I'm not going to be able to come because I have another commitment, but we're flirting with the idea of September 13th. Thanks, Benjamin. And then we're flirting with the idea of running one in Boulder before ETH Denver in February. So keep an eye out for an announcement of that if we're able to pull it together. Is that that BlockLive link? Is that to get a ticket?
Yeah, that's the invite for General Forum on Ethereum Localism this September. And just a little bit more logistics. This is recorded and transcribed, and all of those links and docs will be inside the calendar event. Not edited quite yet, but you can access them.
Great. Well, if there's no more questions, I think we'll break. But thank you so much for co-presenting with me, Matt. PDX style folks, thanks for the invite. This was a lot of fun, and can't wait to watch the recordings of the ones that I missed. All right.
Thanks, guys. This was fun.
Peace and love, y'all. Bye.
Yeah, thanks.